much of the discussion would have been about the role of the Chinese government and government policy and what that might mean in terms of imports and those sorts of things, and exports therefore from Australia. And I guess what Professor Hans has indicated to us, that yes, there are some big picture trends that are still managed by the government, but what we're seeing is a much more commercial and consumer-oriented Chinese market emerge, and the challenges have shifted from wondering what the government's going to do, that is the Chinese government, to how consumers are responding on the ground, what's happening there, all those sorts of things, which I guess are much more like a normal market. But is that, Professor Hans, have I oversimplified that? Is the government and the role of the government and the potential interventionist role of the government becoming less and less a factor in business decisions in China as we go along, or do they still have the potential to disrupt the market in serious ways at different times?
Well, they have a potential to structure markets and possibly to disrupt, but they're very clearly retracting from that, and they're making the structural changes to enable markets now, quite clearly.
Okay. And James, we can't let you get by without WeChat and a reference to that. Now, we've had Delene educating us a bit on social media this morning, but I don't think even she was across WeChat. So I'm interested in a little bit more of your discussion around that and how that works. Is it Facebook on Chinese characters, or?
Well, it's been a dream of mine to receive a social media question, given my my Gen X status, as well as the fact that my colleagues or ex-colleagues would absolutely wet themselves. I'm sure they are, but this is WeChat. Can't see it like my graphs, but basically it is a Chinese Facebook in many respects. But you know, demand drives an outcome, and you know, the corporate communication using WeChat and big data has turned it into a behemoth. So those 600 million users, most of them are in China, which makes good sense, but an awful lot of them are outside of China. So our entire business is on WeChat. Many were when I got there, most are now. And you know, you look at, if anyone does have it, if you go into the First Cut page, you know, you'll see all the advertising. So we uploaded the video of the you know, the cattle, the provenance branding, the region, all that sort of stuff. And it's a really neat way to say to someone, you know, here you go. It's not dissimilar to WhatsApp, but it does tend to be, in my view, an easier tool, because there's been so much more invested in creating that experience for a user.
Sounds like we all better get familiar.
Yeah, get into it. That's good.
Brett, is that part of your experience, that those types of marketing channels are becoming more important, or is the physical distribution still a critical issue in terms of, for example, fresh milk, I guess, and having it timely on the shelf?
I think probably both. We have on our actual bottles a barcode, Authenticate it's called, and what it does is that the consumer can zap it with their phone. It tells them all about the Norco history. It tells them when that bottle was actually filled, at what site, the date, all the rest of it as well. So I think probably the biggest challenge I see from our point of view with fresh milk is a re-education process, because right now the consumer perception is reality, and their perception is that UHT and ESL, extended shelf life milk products, are actual fresh milk when they're not. And here we are now promoting a product that is actual fresh milk. So I think as time goes by, and as the Chinese consumer, especially the middle class area we're looking at, are quite astute, that's going to become a stronger point of difference for us.
I've got a question over here.
Thanks, Mick. To James, I think, with the Bindaroo Beef Group, it appears as though your value chain starts at your feedlot and then goes into China, presumably, or elsewhere from there. But I was just wondering, about the beef producing sector,
Yep.
and what's your strategy of having the broader beef producer engaged with your group?
So what's your name?
Joe Lane from
Joe.
GHD.
Thanks, Joe. Look, really good question, and I think it's a good point to clear up. So the feedlot is an asset that we own, but the cattle that come into that feedlot, and as well as the cattle that come in through the plant, outside of the feedlot, which is many, or many more than the feedlot, they're coming from someone. They're coming out of sale yards, and they're coming out of direct purchasing. So a real strategy, and we have objectives in our business. We all have quarterly objectives, annual objectives, etc. How we run the business is to bridge the gap between the producer and the consumer, and really bring them together. So since I've been there, there's been 2 livestock producer days. We hold them either on plant or we'll do one at the feedlot eventually. I go to all of those, and I certainly have a great soft spot for livestock production, having come from a sheep farm myself. When we look at the market views with respect to beef at the moment, I'm sure that the EYCI is one indicator, but we're seeing things like MSA grading still attracting a really good premium. We're looking at the brands that we're producing through the plant, and thinking, right, well, we need to be able to provide more information back to the producers on who's, what percentage of yield is going into a retail program, and driving that producer to support us as we support them. I'd say for any production or livestock producer that it's so important now to understand what the marketers of your product are doing with respect to their strategy, whether that's an export strategy, a domestic strategy, a branded strategy. If you look carefully, everyone's doing something different, and I think that research and walking into, whether it's grain, beef, cotton, whatever, everyone will have a different strategy or potentially similar strategies, but it's how you can become a strategic partner within that supply chain, as opposed to figuratively speaking, waving the truck goodbye and looking for payment 5 days end of week. And we're really onto that. If anyone comes to Sydney, they come and a lot of them do. They come and sit with me. We show them through how we export the product, what we do, how the shipping works, logistics and things. I think there's an onus on us as that integrated business to share information and really grow that relationship. So it's not just customer relationships, supplier relationships are just so important for us.
Okay, here we go. Yep, there's a question down the front here.
Simon Sellers from Boyce Chartered Accountants. Probably a question for you, James. You talked about being ready. Seems like there's a huge opportunity and you're particularly young and excited, which is fantastic. What do you think about supply? You got any concerns about supply?
Plenty. It's so there's three inches in Inverell overnight, and I know I was talking to Dave Anthony before, and I guess there's some rain in the wrong places, so close to harvest. But from a livestock production perspective, rain or no rain, it was going to get tough because the herd sizes are fairly low. I'd also point out that the US and Brazil are having similar issues with their cattle numbers. So, what's the response to that? I guess part of my presentation was thinking about, or giving an understanding of how we're looking at those markets where we can get that better return. And it wasn't a flippant comment with respect to the strategy to drive a full shelf solution. So, Binderee's on one side, and then Sanga's on the other side. So, lamb, veal, other halal beef, etc. All these and mainstream beef. There's a lot of opportunity now for us to stand up and leverage what we've been doing for such a long time but use the supply chain very, very wisely to do it. I don't think it's about volume of kill. It's about strategically placing the product.
There's a question over there.
Peter Thompson, probably goes to everyone on the panel. I see Toowoomba Airport's going to have its first international freighter fly out on a test run. It's either this week or next week. What implications do you see that that's going to Hong Kong? What implications do you see that has? But no one's, possibly wasn't totally in your topic, but no one's really talked about the Chinese involvement here in Australia, and just interested in views on that. We've had approaches made directly to us where the Chinese are really concerned that we see them as coming here to pinch our land, but they see us as trying to flog their money, and that's the words from the people that visit us. So interested in comments from the panel.
Who wants to talk about Chinese investment in Australian agriculture?
I'll go first. We're a cooperative, so a cooperative structure is quite different. Norco, in terms of its consistent history in the last 5 years, profitability, growth, whatever, would be a fantastic takeover acquisition entity. You can't do that in a co-op though. You can't go and buy shares and build a position and go from there. The only way you can get in is you've got to be a farmer or a member, or you've got to approach the board. If you wanted to buy it, it's then got to go to all the members, and to get all the members to agree on something like that, and they're all farmers, it'll probably take 5 years, so it's not that easy to achieve. We do get approached a lot of the time about investment from China, and obviously again our marketing strategy that we put into place, I was talking about earlier, is that we work off being the Australian farmer-owned co-op, and that's our point of difference. So if we were ever look at changing our structure and our ownership and have investment, external investment, then you go down that path that affects your strategy and also affects the potential of the farm gate price. I think there's great opportunity though working with China. There's a lot of money out there, there's a lot of opportunity. I think the other way around, you know, when you're investing, or I should say building your business in China, you have got to take into account it's another country, it's a communist country, it's different to Australia. So your legal structure and repercussions from that are totally different. So you have to be very much aware that it's not the same as doing business here. There's still lots of opportunity, but my advice again is that you take one step at a time and build your position from there.
Sorry, Professor. When I was up at Beef Week in Rockhampton, I was with ANZ at the time, and I walked around just talking to producers, and said, if capital wasn't an issue, what would you do? So I'd drought-proof my place. I said, okay, how would you do that? Well, I'd put my watering points, you know, up to 5 k's between each other, so the cattle only had to walk maybe 2.5 k's between them. I'd fence my block better, and I'd pasture improve it. I said, are you going to have that sort of capital coming to you anytime soon? No. Okay. So when you look at Australian investment in agriculture, it just doesn't happen. Maybe this room's an exception, but we are quite obsessed with, as a country, with residential real estate and the ASX 200 that are led by four banks, and that's a yield play. Now, when ANZ put together a paper on the China and Australia beef of all things, it talked about the fact that we had to increase our production by between 1.3 and 1.7% to stay steady state in terms of from a market share perspective. So my question is where's the supply response going to happen, and how's it going to be funded if we don't have foreign investment? The other side of that is that we tend to be on the back foot and playing a bouncer when we should be on the front foot and investment ready, so that we can point this capital that really isn't that well educated. What I mean by that is that they often don't know what they're looking for. but we term them tyre kickers, and we sort of flick them out. And when I was in China, I mean, I had so many people pointing me to various people, and once you cut out the middlemen, the accountants, the lawyers, all these sort of people trying to get a feed, and then going into the the actual people that were making the decisions, a lot of them would say, look, we just don't know what we're after, but we need something. And Australia can be much better prepared for investment. We're a country that's founded on foreign investment, and as I pointed out in our presentation, Bindaree Beef Group's gone into that partnership arrangement. So I guess I'm talking from a point of bias, but I do take it back to the producer level in answering the question, because a the audience is interested in it, but equally I often wonder, how are we going to get the succession plans right? In the farm, I know Dave Sackett's got a lot of ideas. I think he's doing a really good job on what growth farms are doing, but there's only one growth farms. What is the supply response? How are we going to maintain our relevance and meet this market, which is just so ready for us to participate in?
Thanks.
May I just come in very briefly? One of the most distressing things you can do is go to one of those Euromonitor conferences on distressed agricultural assets. I think that reflects very much what James was saying. And I think from the Chinese side, we tend to, or the press certainly tends to depict Chinese investment in Australian agriculture very much as grabbing land. But I think the point is much more one of finding assets. And I think there's in fact quite a bit of space on the Australian side to take more initiative and to structure an environment where either we have a way of saying, well, we want people to get into joint ventures, or to get them to extend value chains, so that it's not just confined to that one single element, or largely around land, but it's part of a process that creates anything from work to other markets, to a better integration. And I think on the Chinese side too, there's a learning process. The embassy is just publishing a book with the reports we did with KPMG over the last few years, trying to even educate their own investors to say, well, you have to work closer with partners in Australia. You have to learn. You have to know corporate governance. You have to be able to talk to people. So that is a process, but it seems to be underway.
Okay, I think we've got one final question over here.
Snovello from University of Melbourne. Professor Andreski, I was curious to see in those 32 points in the plan that food safety and food safety regulation didn't seem to feature in that 5-year plan. And does that mean that the Chinese don't regard it as a major issue, but on the other hand, the panel might like to comment that we seem to be selling product into the Chinese on the basis of food safety and to some extent sustainability?
Well, there's a bit of a terminological issue in that food safety or food security are in fact two different terms, and food, I'm getting them confused as well. I think food security is in fact security of supply. And that is not an issue at the moment, or at least in the big, like in the grain sector. There's oversupply and there's stockpiling, and so the issue is in fact more on the food safety side. Now that's a topic where the Chinese are very sensitive, and I think when negotiating with Australians, they try to use only the food security term, not the safety, because it would indicate that their own food is not safe, which they are. Very well aware it is in fact not all that safe, but they try to avoid that public perception. So I think on the one side the food security is largely solved, and the real issue, food safety, is covered in other terminology. So that's part of clean food, and that is all part of the plan, clean and healthy and so on. But it's not. They don't use the terminology to avoid a public perception that in fact there is risk with the food as people get it. James and Brett, is the food safety side of it the big issue?
I think Patrick Yu, who's the CEO of COFCO, summed it up really well. He said there's two types of food security. There's discretionary food security and there's staple food security. He said China will die in a ditch before they can't feed themselves on a staple basis, wheat, corn, sugar, etc. But on a discretionary basis, they're forever short. On the safety side of it, that's exactly what we're banking on. So clean, safe, reliable, traceable origin product is what our ideal consumer is kept awake at night about. It was interesting when I was working at ANZ in China. We had a vast floor, and there was it was like a little sample of upper middle class people, and a lady came in and said, "I'm pregnant," and she put a tin of Anchor milk formula on her desk, and it was there a month later. I said, but I didn't have too many foreigners in the office, and I asked one of the Chinese, I said, "Why is that infant milk formula tin there?" And he said, "That's going to be there for the duration of her pregnancy because she wants everyone to know that she's feeding that baby New Zealand milk, and that she can afford that." So the origin thing, and that was really true, and time again, you know, that point of origin, the safety associated with origin, the cleanliness of the origin, really goes to that consumer point. And certainly we're banking on that with Brett mentioned Authenticate It. You know, that closed loop that JD has. That's all about ensuring that the product is so safe and so reliable, and just won't jump the fence, so to speak.
I agree with that 100%. It's a really huge advantage, if you look at it that way, in terms of what we're doing with fresh milk and ice cream. One of the things that happens in China, as we know a lot, is a lot of copyright fraud with product, and it's a double-edged sword because the market we're aiming at, again, into the middle class that are well-educated, quite well off, they've all been burnt one way or the other. They've been burnt. So, like using Authenticate It, and that shows them that the Norco product, again, James said, it's like Australia or New Zealand, clean and green, and then on top of that it's a 120-year-old farmer-owned cooperative. So it just smacks of quality and credibility. And that actually gives you an advantage, because if they know it's fair income and it's real, they'll pay a fair price for it. And that's what we've capitalised on. So it is really important. It's one of those things that we work very closely with CIQ. We've had them here in Australia doing audits in our factories. We have a good relationship with them. I have to say the standards that we have are extremely high. The standards going into China are even higher again. It's certainly not that way, the other way around, I can tell you. But it is a really important point. And again, as has been touched on, I think for Australia, the potential for us in the next 5-10 years to be able to supply the potential growth and demand in China and Asia is huge. But you've got to start now planning your way through it.